Am I good? Yeah, I am. Anyway, good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be here. We are, as Dr. Rice said, first of all, thank you for the kind words, but we'll try to make it as conversational as possible, and I'm glad there's a chalkboard here because I'm a recovering engineer, so at any moment I have to draw a diagram to make it all make sense to me. But thanks for your interest. It's sort of symbiotic because we are very delighted to tell our story at CPS Energy, and in a very biased way. We think we're starting to do some things that are very, very special, and we hope they begin to move the needle in Texas, especially, and maybe other parts of our country in terms of this energy dynamic in the future. But before I get to that point, I'd like to acknowledge three special people here. One is Dr. Doyle Klein. Thank you for being here. Becky Klein. And my better half, Christine Beneby, who normally gets to hear me talk about business over dinner in places that the conversation should be personal in nature. So it's finally good for her to hear me talk about a business officially. But again, I'm very, very, very happy to be here. I'm going to walk through slides, but to some degree, think of them more as ancillary to the discussion. I really want to generate some discussions, and it's just very nice for me to be on a college campus where there's just sort of the pulse of energy, creativity, and new ideas. So for a guy that sort of steps out of the old traditional boring utility, this is sort of a fun interlude. So with that, I'm going to, and by the way, I'm taking a very big career risk here by operating the slides myself. Normally I don't do this, so they might go anywhere. So for CPS Energy, as was discussed, we are the largest municipal gas and electric utility. I'll start by saying, unlike most municipal utilities, we have a very unique governance model. My position reports to a quasi-independent board of trustees. And the reason I call it quasi is because an ex officio member of that board is the mayor of San Antonio, and then the other four members are selected by quadrant, so they represent different parts of the city. So the other predominant governance model for municipal utilities is to have my position or the executive management report directly to either city manager or mayor. So we're a slight variation of your standard municipal utility. So just wanted to point that out. So we are guided by what we call our Vision 2020. And it was crafted about 4 years ago, I think, and really just said that our target would be by the year 2020 to have about 20% of our generation supply source come from renewable sources. And the other big part of that is we also are going to go after about 65% of our total fleet be low carbon. I would also say, sort of parenthetically, that we, my background is investor-owned, 25 years or so, and the last 2 years have been in the municipal world. Big difference is, so to some degree, I bring to the CPS dynamic sort of a philosophy of being what I call non-ideological. So if you look at sort of the energy dynamic in our country, similar to a lot of areas, it's at different times become somewhat polarized around how some groups view the energy dynamic. There's some, and I say this without suggesting which way is right or wrong or predominant, but some tend to have an affinity towards more traditional power sources. They might or might not be carbon intense, and others might have a preference for more green / renewable sources. So we come at this sort of with a philosophy of being non-ideological, but it's based on those two premises. And so I think it's allowed us to look at this dynamic perhaps more broadly than some other companies that might be restrained either way. So I think at the end of the day, when I talk a bit about our strategy, what it means to our community, there's also a piece of it that has been mentioned earlier, is diversification and a risk mitigation strategy. So this is really more symbolic. It's not really not to scale. But if you look at, pardon the pun, if you look at the left side, the left scale, right now our fleet is about 80% traditional. And so for us, traditional right now means nuclear power and coal. Now, so our nuclear plant is, or the ownership percentage of our nuclear plant, our stake, is fairly mature. So we are producing power at a very, very competitive rate there, along with some of our coal plants. And I'll get to some more detail about both of those as the discussion goes on. But because we have a heavily weighted traditional power source right now, from a weighted cost average standpoint, we can go after our renewable targets without the overall price being sort of tilting towards non-affordability. So we in San Antonio have, we will regain our perks this year as the lowest rates of any major city in Texas and the lowest of any top 10 major city in the country. Very, very competitive. So that's top of mind, and I'll get to what that means to our approach in a second. So my view is that if you look at the right scale, the future as renewables, as technology predominates, renewables are cheaper and they're scalable, my sense is that weight will shift a bit. And I think we're going to be able to take advantage of that. I think you're going to see renewable prices come down along with the scalability, and I think we're going to be able to get some traditional sources that are also very, very competitively priced, i.e. today, natural gas, and I think at some point in the future, nuclear also. So that just gives you a visual of our view, is that because we have this heavily weighted portfolio of traditional sources, we can inch intelligently towards more renewables and keep our rates very, very affordable. So that's our overall goal. This is just a snapshot of where we are today and where we will be by the year 2020. Pie chart on the left is essentially 2010. Pie chart on the right is 10 years from 2010, 2020. Now, this is just capacity. So, you know, I guess the simple example I always give is, you know, if you've got 6 cars in the garage, that's capacity. If you only drive 3, that's generation. So I'll get to the next chart, which shows what we generate. So that's capacity, what we have on the books. So if you look at the bottom left of the first chart, about 12.74% renewables, but look at the 85% traditional. So as I said before, we're heavy traditional today, or back to 2010. Look at the right, our goal by the year 2020 will be about 70% traditional. Again, generation. Capacity. This one's generation. Today, 84.57, and by 2020, 74.43, I guess that is. So we're still going to be very heavily weighted traditionally with traditional sources, even by the year 2020. But we'll have more renewables, and the traditionals will be of the low carbon intense type, i.e. more natural gas, and hopefully over time, more nuclear, and even some clean coal. And I'll talk a bit about some of those technologies in a few minutes. So that's a snapshot of today and what we project by the year 2020. Now, you'll also notice on the right pie chart, it's somewhat more diversified, and I'll talk about why that's important. So let's say roughly 20% natural gas, 23.5% nuclear, 34% coal. But it'll be coal of generally a cleaner type, with some of it with the carbon even captured. We'll have the step up there, the STEP. That's essentially our conservation and demand reduction. But we fund that through a program that's, the acronym's called STEP. It's Save for Tomorrow Energy Program. So we'll have some wind, we'll have solar, we'll have landfill gas power, we'll have purchase power. So we're going to have a very, very diversified, what I call heavily or very strategically weighted generation fleet. So one of the things I talk a lot about is what I call the real price of renewables. So let me just step back a little bit and say one of the big differences between the investor-owned world and municipal world is municipal utilities, we are not for profit. So that doesn't mean, you know, the push isn't just as intense to be efficient, but being not for profit allows us to have a longer horizon to realize the value of our investments. So in the investor-owned world, quite often, you know, you're programmed to think about almost to some degree next quarter's earnings call. So there's a shorter time horizon. In the municipal world, you have a longer time horizon to realize the value of some of the decisions you make today. So with that point in mind, one of the things I think about today is the real price of renewables. So very broadly, if you look at the bottom three there, wind, solar, demand reduction, to me, if you look at the right side, risk hedge, that column, so when you get a competitive price for wind or some renewable, in my view is it's very tough to quantify this in a model, but you have to account for the fact that generally that's going to remove some risk of environmental regulation or retrofit off the table. So if you've got wind or solar, generally you're not going to have to go back and invest dollars to clean coal or to filter pollutants or other such things. You're generally not going to have to go back and worry about entrapment or entrainment of marine life. You're not going to have to worry about thermal temperatures for water. And you're not going to have to worry about water at all, which is a scarce commodity in Texas and the Southwest. So if you take a competitive price for renewables and you subtract those avoided costs, that in our view, we factor that into our model. So it's cheaper than the price you're normally going to get. Now, if you also add for solar, that it's much more coincident with peak demand. Generally on the hottest days, the sun's shining. Generally on the hottest days, the wind's not blowing. So generally, solar also has a bigger factor because it's more coincident with peak load. But the point is, to me, you have to factor those things in to get the true cost. And then when you add in what I'm going to talk about later, that we've crafted this approach in a way that allows us to partner with other companies who bring economic development and technology to San Antonio, and we get an education investment, it really begins to make the real cost something that for a municipal utility looking on a longer horizon becomes very, very affordable in a lot of ways. And that's just looking at sort of the, I guess, in a quantifiable way. There's a qualitative way that's important too, in the sense that you're cleaning the air, which is very, very important. So this journey for us started with sort of maybe the Rosetta Stone for all this for us was 2 years ago. We made the decision to not invest in a scrubber, a flue gas desulfurizer for two of our coal plants. These plants are 30-plus year vintage. I think they're about 34 years old now. And we would have invested $565 million for essentially, two pieces of equipment to control sulfur dioxides. So I just arrived at the company and I sort of stepped back and said, does that really make sense to invest that kind of capital for an asset that old? So I said, why don't we find a way to let that plant retire by roughly 2018 to 2020, and we will redirect those hundreds of millions of dollars to more renewable sources and lower carbon sources. So that's really how we begin to aggressively pursue this vision and begin to put together some tangible steps in our view, move the needle and maybe change the game. So essentially we put that off, and if you look at the fourth bullet, we then begin to consider what are low carbon or no carbon replacements. Natural gas. This also coincided with the point where natural gas was going down in price. At this point, it was roughly high twos, low threes in terms of dollars per million BTUs. And the second option was nuclear. That again, I come from a company that is, Exelon is my prior employer, the largest nuclear output company in the country. So I have a general appreciation for the benefits of nuclear, especially in its ability to be a low carbon intense source, and then clean coal, in addition to renewables. So we made this decision, and we were going to redirect those savings to pursue our vision. But that's where it started. And there's a quote down there by Dr. Economides, a chemical and biomolecular professor at the University of Houston, that we had quite a bit of those, but that one was very supportive of the decision that we made. Second option was to look at combined cycle natural gas plants. And again, this coincided with gas prices taking a relative dip. And again, it meets all the qualifications, low carbon intense, and also not in small measure, a fuel type extracted, produced locally here in Texas. You know, parts of the Eagle Ford shale rock formation might be under our feet, but it gave us a chance to use a low-cost fuel in Texas as opposed to supporting the Powder River Basin in Montana, Wyoming, and having clean coal shipped here by rail. So it had a whole lot of benefits that were very advantageous to us. And so it also happened, again, because natural gas prices were low. A lot of the natural gas plants were really at depressed prices. They were about half of what you have to pay 3 years earlier. So a lot of this stuff just was a sort of a confluence of good timing for us. So it allowed us eventually to purchase a natural gas plant. Rio Nogales, 800 megawatts, a 10-year-old plant. And it also happened to be an exact twin sister of another combined cycle plant that we have in our fleet. So we're able to leverage equipment, leverage operators, and a lot of the ancillary parts of that transaction that really allowed us the savings. So very, very fortuitous on several accounts. And another comment down there from Dave McCurdy, the president and CEO of the American Gas Association, supportive of our approach. And by the way, we didn't pay those people, I don't think. Then the third approach was to look at nuclear. And we're an existing equity owner in South Texas Project Units 1 and 2, about 40%. Austin Energy here in town, it's about 16%. I just have a new CEO. They just went through a change in leadership recently. So there's a new CEO there who's starting to sink in, a really good guy. And there was also a project years ago to build 2 more units at 3 and 4. And they would be called units 3 and 4. We would be prospectively and would be 8% owners in both units. Right now, there is really an equity gap that's making that difficult to put back together, most of it driven by low gas prices. My sense is, and this is my view, and it's always risky taking a view when there's a nuclear expert in the room, but my view is the slowdown in the sort of the nuclear renaissance is driven more by economics than any real concerns about safety, even after the event happened in Japan. Consequently, one of the potential partners would have been TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company. After the unfortunate event in Japan in March of 11, TEPCO backed out, and so part of the issue there is we have an equity hole. So I would say the loan guarantee process for that project is technically still active, but perhaps on life support. And then lastly, as I mentioned, there's downward pressure on natural gas prices. So right now that project is on hold. But we are still very interested in it if it's regenerated, and also future options. And I think, as I've talked to Dr. Klein at different times, one of the future options might be some version of small modular reactors, which in addition to allowing nuclear plants to be built in a short amount of time, it's also more attractive because potentially it keeps investors' money tied up less than sort of the big traditional units. So yet to be determined, but if and when some version of future options or some version of South Texas Project Units 3 and 4 evolve, we have an equity stake, and we still be very interested at some point if that were to materialize. And then the last option besides renewables would be clean coal. IGCC is Integrated Gasification Combined Cycle. So we signed on to a group called Summit Texas Clean Energy to purchase 200 megawatts over 25 years from a plant that is scheduled to be built in 2015, 2016. It will be the first U.S.-based plant that combines IGCC technology with the ability to capture 90% of the carbon and transport it to the Permian Basin for enhanced oil recovery. So essentially, 90% of the carbon does not go into the air, and the process is generally as clean as the cleanest coal plants today. Another gratuitous quote at the bottom there. I promise we don't pay these people. But the point is that across the spectrum for us, again, I go back to our view is that we're somewhat agnostic on the technology as long as it fulfills the requirements of being low carbon and or renewable. And in the case of these, if they're base load, that's even more value to us, but also to the state of Texas because potential resource adequacy issues going forward. That's been our sort of broad approach. Now, the other option for us has been solar, and we built or had built for us and commissioned 2 solar plants this year, 20 megawatts and 10 megawatt sites. We had a significant education investment as a part of the deal, and we also negotiated with Sun Edison to open 2 regional offices in San Antonio. So perhaps there are some options in the future to do more projects with them. Additionally, we had consummated, and I say we very loosely because there were a whole lot of people that did a lot of the grinding and helped us fashion that deal. And one of them sitting right there, Raul, raise your hand, one of our CPSers. But a big project, the biggest of its kind in the country that's combined solar with economic development. So we coined the new phrase called EDA, Economic Development Agreement, in addition to a PPA, Purchase Power Agreement. So that combines both, and it's first of its kind. But we put an RFP out, a request for proposal, and we said that we'd partner with someone who would build 400 megawatts of solar around Texas for us. And I'd add, there's several advantages to someone doing it for us. One is that we're a municipal utility, so we don't have access or privy to federal incentives, but our partners can. So our partners put the initial capital in, we just buy the power. We think that after 6-7 years, as the investment credits roll off and the cash flows change for our partners, then we've negotiated to our agreements that we'd have an option to buy the assets. But it's really an advantage for us because we use less initial capital. But what we said that if we were going to purchase this power from you at a fixed price for 25 years, at minimum we wanted 800 plus jobs in San Antonio. We wanted a minimum of $100 million capital investment. We wanted an annual payroll of $40 million. And we also wanted a significant education investment. And so that part, the economic development aspects of it, are the first of its kind that I'm aware of. And certainly if it's not, it's the biggest of its kind. But I suspect it's first kind of deal like that of its kind. And from what I can detect, a lot of people are thinking about doing some version of that today, other companies. But it does a couple of things. A, as I mentioned earlier, as with respect to, in addition to the other options I talked about, it hedges us against those kinds of things that I talk about in a real cost of solar or the real cost of renewables. Hedges us against a carbon tax, EPA regulations, Water Act, and market price fluctuations. So, and again, solar is more coincident with peak load. So this is a good part of the area to try to take advantage of solar. Not as good as California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada. We're close to the Gulf, so we get more cloud cover, but still a really, really good deal. And that company's already set up shop. They've hired about 14 people. They brought some executives from Atlanta and Korea that have already, dropped anchor, put their kids in school. It's really moving, really an impressive culture there. So that's moving, and we're awfully proud of that. So all those things together sort of constitute this concept we call our new energy economy. It's certainly not copyrighted, so others can use it, but we try to use it. We use it in a way that it's a tangible way to link economic development, renewables, and clean technology, along with R&D and education. So another great quote from Lisa Jackson, the current EPA administrator. But it's a unique model, and for us, it's brought these partners to San Antonio. And to date, we have about, I think, as of today, about 130 jobs already in San Antonio, which compute to about just south of 100 million in economic activity annually in San Antonio already. By the time all this is consummated, it should be about $1 billion annually to the San Antonio economy, and it would be significantly north of 1,000 jobs. But the first one up there to the left is concert. So this is part where some of this gets fun. You know, we're looking at renewable technologies both at the wholesale level but also at the retail level. The retail version comes in the form of demand reduction. And one of the ways we're going to do that is through home area networks. And these are wireless ways to control your appliances and also to get energy information, energy management information instantaneously. So a lot of that's out there now. Some have the controllable thermostats, but there's not really, this is probably the best technology so far that's put that all together. And what it means is we're going to install these in about 150,000 homes in San Antonio, and that will equate to about 250 megawatts of demand reduction. So that's equivalent to a third of a decent-sized power plant that we won't have to build because people will use less because they get instantaneous feedback and they get lower bills for it. And we're going to give this technology away because it's funded by that STEP program I talked about earlier on one of the pie charts. At any rate, this company relocated from the Research Triangle Park in Raleigh, North Carolina, and they are on target to have 150 jobs by 2015, and they're well on their way to do that. We also have a joint partnership with UTSA in terms of research for this concert technology. But the other advantage of the concert technology is it's probably the longest I've ever gone without writing a diagram or drawing the diagram. But essentially, I'll try to maybe do this left-handed. But we hope that in addition to having home-by-home demand reduction, we hope that if we can, cluster these installations around substations or even locational marginal areas, that collectively, in a cumulative way, we can sell or monetize that service through ERCOT, meaning ancillary services, that we can help them regulate voltage. Maybe we can help them with volt damped reactive support. But there's a value to that I think is unrealized and untapped. Now, if we happen to make all these installations of home area networks somewhat random, they probably wouldn't be in a cumulative way of much value electrically. So this is very difficult. We're probably going to need, by the time some of you graduate, maybe we'll try to hire you, because it's going to take a higher order of an algorithm to figure that out and where these things should be. But that's the future. That's part of the demand side, smart grid future. And I think we have a chance to be one of the first ones to get there. There is incredible value there, in addition to some of the ostensible values of lower bills, less demand. And if we can do this in another area, in these kind of integrated areas, on the back end, we can also retire older assets, natural gas plants that are simple cycle and inefficient. So we can monetize it in several ways. Our customers get lower bills. Hopefully one day we can sell ancillary services or create some value for it, and we can retire older assets because in these areas we won't need them anymore. In addition to, some might argue the best option is each installation is less megawatts of a hydrocarbon being burned to put pollutants in the air. So, so we think that's something that's very, very big, and Concert is our big, big partner. Green Star is a LED lighting company, and oh, by the way, we're converting 25,000 of our high-pressure sodium vapor street lights to LED lights. LED lights are roughly half the amount of energy as a high-pressure sodium vapor light. So just from that, doing 25,000 lights, we'll get about 8 megawatts of demand reduction. They're brighter, they're cleaner, they're safer, they're programmable. We have some prototypes now with our partners that can brighten as cars approach and dim themselves as cars go by. I mean, all this is the future, and it'll be tied into a common mesh network, Concert plus Green Star. So I think we're probably more out front with those things than any other company, certainly in the United States, if not the world. I mentioned Texas Clean Energy Project, Clean Coal. OCI Solar, that's our partners for the 400 megawatt solar deal. I mentioned Sun Edison. And the last partner is Coal Car USA. They make refrigerated trucks that are electric, and even some can be recharged with solar panels on the roofs of these cars. They deliver home groceries. So they sell these trucks to Walmart, Delsons, these companies that deliver home groceries. But we have a partnership where we've installed 120 charging stations in San Antonio, and they're in the process of relocating their U.S. headquarters in San Antonio as a part of that deal. So, so quite a broad spectrum of options of things we're doing, but all guided by that initial vision. And sum total, if you look at the third bullet, that's going to equate to about SOx reductions, sulfur dioxides of 91% reduction compared to year 2009, 58% reduction in mercury, 30% reduction in nitrous oxides, and about 25% reduction in carbon dioxide, which equates to about taking 1 million cars off the road in San Antonio. So even if there were not a compelling case for all the reasons I've cited, there's a compelling case for this approach because it'll make the air cleaner and will impact significantly the incidence of upper respiratory ailments in San Antonio. So to some, health is the most predominant reason, but beyond that, there are a lot of, I think, economic reasons for this approach. So that, I don't know how I'm doing with time, okay, but that's a quick Reader's Digest version of what we're doing, and very, very, I think, unique. Tough to pull all this together because to some degree, I like to say to our workforce, we still have day jobs. We got to keep the lights on, and we got to keep the gas flowing. So unless you operate well, you don't get a chance to do all these, what I consider fun things because I'm kind of a geek. So we still have our jobs, and as was said before, we finished in 2011 our best reliability year in history, our best safety record in history. We won the J.D. Power Award last month we're the number one, the company with the highest customer satisfaction of any utility in the entire South. And that includes Florida, Georgia, that even includes Southern, Dale, sorry. But we're number one in all the investor-owned utilities, Duke Power, Florida Power and Light. We're number one in customer satisfaction. So the point is that this business is still built on keeping the lights on. And if you don't do that, nothing else matters. And as a credit to our organization, we've been able to do that in a way, especially recently, that allows us to do some of these things that move the future needle, but are also becoming a lot of fun pursuits for our employees. We have put together, we're putting together Tiger teams to help with OCI build-out. So what that's going to mean is we're putting together teams of 6 people. Hopefully it'll be people of your generation, technically inclined, that are going to understand how you develop a solar farm. How does a inverter work? How does an actuator work? How do you tie in solar installations to the distribution system or the transmission system? So we're going to have teams standing over the shoulder of OCI as they build all this out so that we develop those skills in-house. And I think that's going to be fun. And we're creating quite a few of those other type partnerships. Most of you have heard of Rackspace, which is headquartered in San Antonio. We have a team that's jointly working with Rackspace. We're going to have an announcement probably next month. You guys are getting a sneak preview of it. But we're putting together a joint team, another Tiger team of our folks and Rackspace folks, and we're going to come up with creative options. We're thinking about, in Rackspace, I said to Graham Weston, the CEO, that, maybe they should build solar shading in the parking lot. We'll install charging stations underneath it, and maybe he can give his employees a rebate to buy an electric vehicle. And then they discharge during the day and help light the building to pay them back or put it into the grid. So we're thinking of fun projects like that and giving our employees a chance to tap into the future, because either all or some versions or more is the future of this industry, the things that I just talked about. Not a better time to be in the industry, extremely complex, but that's fun. Lots of moving targets. I think broadly, and I'll close with this, I think there are 3 major risks in the industry right now. I think the first big risk is environmental risk, meaning that this risk of future EPA regulation. So whether you think it's enough, not enough, overreach, it is what it is. and you can be guaranteed there's extra regulation out there. So you've got to construct a fleet that shields you from too much burden with that. So you'd have to go back to your customers and go back and raise capital to retrofit your units or your technologies to meet the latest EPA regulations. Second big risk out there, I think, is fuel type risk. So you can't put all your bets at one window. As I said, I tend to be more of a market-driven thinker. I think the market picks the winners. We're not going to, but we want to be able to scale up with whatever wins, both in traditionals and renewables. But there is a risk, I think, in going all in with one fuel type. A lot of companies today are going all in with natural gas because it's plentiful and it's cheap. And you can rest assured at some point gas is going to go up dramatically, and a lot of companies are going to have to deal with that. And then the third big risk, I think, is technology risk, meaning it's sort of part and parcel of the fuel type risk that there are an array of technologies out there. Years ago, this decision used to be very binary. It was I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not a lot. If this were time and this were demand, you just plotted a point out there and you said, wow, right here, 7 years from now, we're going to have to build a power plant to meet the growing demand, and it's going to be a binary decision, coal or natural gas. Today, it could be coal, natural gas, integrated gasification, combined cycle, clean coal. It could be IGCC. It could be, you name it. It could be circulating fluidized bed. It could be nuclear. It could be wind, solar, hydro, battery storage. I haven't even talked about that yet. Or pump storage or compressed air storage, an array of options today. And then you have the EPA that's kind of thinking of new regulations as we sit here and talk. So it's a very complex dynamic, but to some degree that makes it fun. And so I've tried to think of our fleet as developing an approach that mitigates those three risks I talked about, but also creates some value for our customers. And I really think that a big part of making all that happen is going to be this nexus of public-private partnerships and academia. And quite frankly, that's one of the reasons it's fun for me to do this, because you all are going to be the ones that are making this stuff happen and converting it into something tangible, usable, that's creating value. And someday I hope to, while you're doing all that, I hope to be on some island on the coast of Florida, retired, while people your generation are creating value. But this is what we're doing. This is the future. I'll stop now and open it up for any questions. But thanks so much for your attention. Appreciate it.
We have time for several questions. And as I was listening, I was thinking, can you make copies of you and place around the U.S.?
Oh, I think my wife would say there's already one of me, and that might be too much. But I really hope, if not copies of me, I hope that others begin. I'm not arrogant enough to assume that our approach works to everybody, but I do hope it spurs questions and people become more broad thinking about the array of technologies out there, everything from clean coal, natural gas, nuclear, to the renewable technologies, and that you see them in a different light, and you look at what I call the real cost. And if that approach fits your vision and your company, then I think give it some more thought. But I do hope that what we're doing begins to be the tip of the spear in how we approach the future. And again, not ideologically based, because at the end of the day, you got to create value, or it just doesn't go anywhere. So I think those things are not mutually exclusive, and so I hope others consider our approach as they look towards the future.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming. This is all very exciting. But my question is, would you please tell us some more about the STEP program that's funding the demand?
Sure, demand response. Yeah, and conservation. Again, STP, the acronym is for Save for Tomorrow Energy Program. It was a program devised by our board of trustees about 2008, I think, prior to my arrival. But basically, the board charged the company with by the year 2020 or 2018, reduce demand by 750 megawatts. Is that right, Will? 771. 771 megawatts, equivalent at that time of a decent-sized power plant. So they said, and here's the funding for that. So you've got essentially a decade to put together a demand response construct, conservation, rebates, everything's included in other words, a decade to reduce power to avoid having to build a new power plant. So, so that's already funded. It's built into our future rate assumptions. So that gives us a lot to play with. So that's why one of the big game changers was home area networks, that we can give it to our customers. They're seeing about 8 to 10% reduction in their bills, so they like it. Again, we are also seeing less demand on our assets, and at some point, if we can structure this right again, we can retire some assets. And the other thing, too, that's very important with that, and I didn't talk about it very much, but there's this notion that in this business, you're programmed to want to make sure you are between your customers and someone else. I have a suspicion that the Apples of the world, the Googles of the world, are going to figure out how to get to our customers. And so I'd rather partner with some people that are thinking like that. Because what's going to happen one day, is my view, and it might not be exactly like this, but some variation, is that you're going to be sitting on, on your chair with a remote control, and you're going to be watching something, and you'll hit a button, and it'll flip to a screen that shows your energy usage, a pie chart. And it'll say, your kitchen or your refrigerator, your appliances are using this, this, this. And you'll know. At some point, probably in that TV is going to be a microchip that talks to your smart meter. And you're going to be able to hit a button to maybe program your dryer to come on at 2 in the morning. And you just go dump the clothes in. It'll sit there, and it'll come on whenever prices are lowest. I think all that stuff's the future. And I don't want customers, depending on Apple and Google, for their energy management, I want it to be CPS. So the other benefit to Concert, and the other advantage to it, is that it gives us a chance to be at the table with the people that are thinking about this. And I was at Silicon Valley about 2 months ago at Kleiner Perkins and at Google. I spent half a day at Google, and trust me, they're thinking about that. And so we have an advantage of being there first. So anyway, sort of a sidetrack, but the STEP program is a funding source that gives us the funds to reduce the equivalent of a power plant over a decade. And so we've used that for an array of demand reduction and renewable options, including Concert, some solar. We're talking to battery storage companies right now. I hope, if I'm here 6 months from now, I can talk about the latest addition to our constellation of companies, and it might be a battery storage company, because the game changer in this business, I think, sort of like the God particle, the Higgs boson particle, the game changer here is, I think, is to have dispatchable renewables. So you connect battery storage or some storage mechanism to an intermittent renewable, and you can dispatch. So I'd love to be right at the front of that too. So we're going to have a chance through STEP program and other partnerships to chase some of those things down. Yes. Oh.
Sorry. Thank you so much for coming and speaking. It's really edifying. I just have 2 quick questions. One is, can you talk about what incentives you give currently, if you do, to spur adoption of solar in either the residential or commercial markets? And then the second part of that is, what do you think it's going to take to drive adoption in Texas to higher levels?
Well, I can't give you specifics, but I think our statistics are roughly, our solar rebate, and sort of grade my paper here, Raul, but I think it's roughly 40% subsidized residential installations. Now, I have at times been at odds with some in our community over utility scale solar versus residential solar. And my bias is towards utility scale solar. My view is, on a continuum, we will go aggressively after residential solar once OCI builds a manufacturing plant in San Antonio, because prices will come down. So right now, when we have plotted residential solar installations in San Antonio, and you can imagine they're clustered around zip codes where they're high-income people because they can afford it. So to some degree, it's a red line product. And so I have a slight aversion to that until we can bring prices down so that it becomes more of a sort of a, I hate to use the word egalitarian product, but that more people have access to it. So that's one issue. The other issue is, to some degree, I sort of apply maybe economics to it in the sense that years ago, utilities raised capital either through debt or equity, selling stock or borrowing money to raise capital to build poles, wires, substations, power plants, transformers, switches, breakers, everything. And you spend that capital with an assumption that your customer is going to need you 24/7. Not full out, but generally 24/7. And that there's some usage ratio. It might be 70% usage, 60%, but you generally base it on that assumption. So as you start to aggressively move towards broad, aggressive residential, let's say in this case solar installations, your customers that have that installation only need you 16 hours a day instead of 24, right? And in some cases, some locales, not only that, but they sell you back the power they're generating for higher than you can produce it yourself. But that reduction of that going down from 24 hours a day to 18 or 16 hours, that is stranded investment. Your assets are underutilized. Someone pays for that. It's not a line item anywhere, but those costs have to be transferred somewhere else. So my view is I'd rather go after utility scale solar, A, because you can build it close to load centers and bring jobs. B, it's the fastest way to clean the air if you're replacing hydrocarbon sources, because you have to have solar installed on about 20,000 homes to equal one decent-sized solar farm. So I just think now is not the time to pursue that aggressively. I do think for us, I hope in 3 to 5 years, it's really aggressive because we expect to be manufacturing panels in town and they'll be sold cheaper to our customers. And solar will scale up. If you look at some of the models at National Renewable Energy Lab, solar cell efficiency is really increasing, some say according to sort of Moore's law, sort of like microchip or integrated circuit storage doubles every 18 months or something. But anyway, they're on a fast track increasing their efficiency. So I just think that all those things will converge in the next few years and really make it more affordable for a broad spectrum of our customers. So, so we have focused primarily on utility scale solar mainly because of those factors, those 3 factors. But great question. And as you can tell, I've probably answered a few times already. Yes, sir.
Do you have or are you planning sort of time of day pricing? You give the example of watching the close at 2 in the morning, but how do you motivate people to want to do that?
Yeah, we're modeling time of day use right now, and I think we'll end up with some version of that. But your premise is correct. That's the only way you incentivize people to do it, is there's got to be an economic benefit to it. So we're trying to figure out what that should look like right now. The other big unknown is going to be once you begin to scale up in electric vehicles, if we do, that's also another factor. How do you incent them to not charge at 5 o'clock when they get home and make our peak worse? So the big nugget's going to be how do you incentivize those folks to charge at 2 in the morning? So we're trying to figure that out now. But excellent point, very well taken. So we are taking a very, very strong look at that. Yes.
And I was just wondering if you could quickly address, from the perspective of shifting from a investor-owned utility to a municipal utility, how your perception of risk changed in those 2 environments.
Wow, that's a great question. It changed dramatically. So the way I'd summarize it, maybe in a colloquial way, is I go from playing for the upside to now playing to avoid the catastrophic downside. So that's how I would summarize it. Functionally, what it means is, as an example, you hedge. We hedge, right? So we buy future power in a forward market, and we buy natural gas in a forward market. So quite often in the investor-owned world, you're hedging in a forward market for profit. So you see a period where energy prices are cheap, you gobble them up, because you might think demand will rise, let's say, 6 months out. Or you might be buying blocks of power now because your meteorologists tell you that it's going to be a tough summer next year. And you probably shouldn't know this, but people do. You know the outage schedules of your competitors. So you might say, don't get that out of this room. Are we being filmed? But in theory, you could understand which units are going to be out. Your meteorologist might tell you it's going to be a real hot summer, et cetera, et cetera. So you might buy blocks of power anticipating that you can make some upside in the future. We wouldn't do that here. We're nonprofit, so we have to have very tight controls around or conservative approach to how we hedge in that example. So that's an example of how it takes shape functionally. But at a high level, again, I go from at times playing for the upside to playing to avoid the catastrophic downsides. I am to some degree playing defense, and that's the genesis of our diversified risk mitigation strategy. Mm-hmm.
We'll get the mic to you in a second.
So you've talked a lot about the demand response and role of consumers in this. I'm curious how your approach is going to fit with the rest of Texas, which is a deregulated market where consumers can say, I want to pay more and know that 100% is coming from renewable, versus in San Antonio, I'm going to have to go with Concert and that's it. So could you talk about that tension a little bit?
Sure, but they'll still have that option with us. In fact, we have a solartricity program and a windtricity program that they can opt to purchase blocks from those renewables. And I really think that, so again, this is all so neat. I hope all you guys are enticed to come work for us. But think about it. Right now, we are trying to figure out those kinds of algorithms that help us predict what motivates our customers right now as we speak. So I guarantee you there are probably some slice of customers that might be above an annual income level. Maybe they're in homes that are 5,000 square feet and higher. That would say, I'll pay more if it's from a solar source. And we're going to, at some point, we'll develop a product for them. So we'll still have that capability even through Concert. So that does not limit us at all. Now, to your earlier inference, we in San Antonio are in a closed market. We're not in an open retail market as the investor-owned utilities are in Dallas, Houston, and I think even El Paso. San Antonio, Austin are in closed retail markets. So we have a running start in terms of putting a wall around our customers and keeping the Googles and the Apples out. I use those as an example, but there are a lot of companies out there, you know, could be through gaming, but they're willing to lose billions to get to our customers. But our customers will still have the choice to earmark their supply sources coming from, we think at some point, an array of renewables. And especially once we get that solar built, then we really will have some options. But they're not precluded from that even with the Concert technology. Yes?
I was trying to pick up on where the 20% renewables were coming from, and I noticed that you've got about 12% from wind and maybe 2% from solar, and I think the rest came from the STEP. I think that was
Demand response, yes.
Okay. So I guess my question is, with all these renewables, and of course a lot of them are intermittent kind of sources, you've kind of hinted that there's going to be some type of energy storage needed. Do you expect that by the time that those goals are met in 2020 that there's going to be a large-scale energy storage system of some kind?
I think it's, so first of all, I knew it would happen. I tried to go through the slides quick enough before anybody would do the math, but you noticed. But I think I'm referencing it, there's a need for it to come fast enough for the industry and Texas. We're going to be fine at CPS. Because don't forget those scales that we still going to have by 2020, 76% of our power from base load traditionals, nuclear, natural gas, coal. So we're in the industry what we call a long generation. We're going to be fine either way. But I think it's going to be beneficial for the linkage of that storage technology to intermittence for the industry and maybe the country. But CPS will be fine either way. I think if it happens, it's very advantageous to us because it immediately increases the value of your renewables. But we don't need it to serve our native customers. We'll have plenty generation along with our demand reduction through STEP. So we'd be fine. But I do think it's beneficial for the industry and certainly even Texas as it tries to prepare for its potential resourcing adequacy questions. Because even if you begin to pour concrete today, it'd be tough to get enough natural gas plants built baseload in Texas to meet the scarcity challenge that'll be coming probably by 2014, Kanan. But so a near-term benefit will be if you can reduce demand. So it's more beneficial for Texas and ERCOT and maybe the country. But again, to say it one more time, we individually as CPS should be fine.